Good morning. Today on Spotlight, selling pot and treating juvenile offenders. Michigan regulators say the sale of recreational marijuana could start in this state as early as December 1st. But exactly who will be able to sell it and in which communities? Cannabis legal expert Doug Maines of the Honickman Law Firm will tell us. And later, from our Southfield studio, Mary King of the Council on Crime and Delinquency will talk about how she hopes Michigan's new Raise the Age law will be implemented for juveniles in the state of Michigan. It's Sunday, November the 17th. I'm Chuck Stokes, and this is Spotlight. December 1 is the date we keep hearing. Recreational marijuana can go on sale in the state, at least the first few facilities. Too much too soon? And is this state really ready?
You know, the December 1st date is kind of the big date in the news right now. But for those of us who are working in this industry on a day-to-day basis, we're a little bit confused and concerned as to kind of what the response will be to that. And I think there's two real reasons. First, what we've been hearing from the state is that those first recreational adult use sales probably weren't going to occur until late March, early April. We were hearing that up until about 2 weeks ago.
That's what we've been hearing for a long time.
So
it seems to have sped up.
And it did, and I understand there's political pressures out there. Everybody, there were a lot of people who voted for this last November and thought the next day they could go out and buy marijuana. So I know people have been chomping at the bit for about a year now.
Where do you think the greatest pressure is coming from?
I think it's from the electorate. For the most part, people really expected that this system would ramp up very quickly, and it hasn't, I think, in a lot of their eyes. And I also think, this is a new source of revenue, and as long as sales aren't occurring, there's no revenue coming into state or local coffers, and we all realize how important that is. But the other kind of surprising thing at this point is the one thing we're hearing from all our clients who are in the space is that there's just not enough product out there right now. They can't, stock their shelves because there's no flour out there for them. There's no kind of edibles out there. So by allowing kind of those facilities to take up to 50% of their inventory and transition it into the adult use system, it's just going to kind of exacerbate that problem that's out there right now. And it's going to be interesting to see how those two systems, how long they can last with just the product that's out there right now.
So for clarification for the person that's watching this, has been watching this process since 2018, and it can be a little confusing at times. Basically, medical marijuana facilities can now take 50% of their inventory and transfer it over to the adult use facilities if you have a license to operate both. Is that correct?
Yes. So once you get your recreational license beginning December 1st of this year, you'll be able to transition up to 50% of your inventory to an equivalent licensee. So if you own a medical marijuana grower, you can transfer 50% of your product over to your adult use grower facility.
So I'm hearing some of the medical marijuana clients are feeling concerned because they're afraid that that's going to run out, and when they go in for their medical marijuana, which they've gotten, a script from a doctor saying you can do it, and it's not going to be there because so much has been transferred over to the adult side. Is that a legitimate fear?
I think it's absolutely a legitimate fear. I mean, right now we don't have enough inventory out there in the system to supply the state's, 300,000 or 400,000 medical marijuana patients, and now they're going to be competing with, the millions of potential adults out there who may want to buy adult use marijuana. So I think it's absolutely a realistic consideration, and it's logistically, I'm just not sure how it's going to work.
How difficult is it to get the license? I hear it's like your life is an absolute open book.
It's gotten much better. This is an area where the state has really streamlined the process. So when the medical licenses initially came online, that application was absurd. I mean, we had people turning in 5-6 bankers' boxes worth of documents. You had to turn in 3 years worth of monthly statements for every bank account you had. You had to turn in documents for every property you had an interest in. You had to turn in 3 years worth of taxes, W-2s, 1099s. So for somebody who's a high net worth individual, has been involved in a lot of businesses, that's a lot of paper that they had to turn in. So the state's moved it now and really kind of streamlined this. And what they've done is under the recreational law, for the first 2 years, basically the only people who can apply are people who already have a medical license for most of the recreational licenses. So the state said, we're not going to reinvent the wheel. We've already kind of done our due diligence. We've done our deep background check on you. We're going to make this adult use application very simple and straightforward for you.
All right, we're going to take a little break. When we hurry right back, I want to talk about your involvement from the very first legislation dealing with all of this in Lansing and some of the experience that you have with the legislature and what this potentially means for the state as a whole and those cities that have decided to opt out. All right, we'll be right back with Doug Maines of Honickman right after this. You were involved with writing legislation, both the medical marijuana and also the adult use facility marijuana. You also were involved with Pontiac when they came on board with all this, as well as, I guess, Lansing?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Any major differences between the various cities that are doing it and how the licensing process is taking effect?
Every city is different, and I mean, they're really all over the place. What we generally see are a few common themes. So most cities that are opting in and allowing facilities, they're okay with the growers and the processors. They're generally not putting too strict of a limit on those because they're basically going to be an industrial building on the edge of town, and people aren't really going to know what's going on there. Where we really see strict limitations is on the retail side of things, because obviously that's going to be something you want in a high traffic area, something where it's going to be very obvious what type of product is being sold there. So that's the general theme.
How concerned are you that the quality control factor is also going to be in place so that whatever gets into the marketplace is what it's said to be and not stronger or weaker than what it's said to be?
This is another area where I think the state's done a really good job, and I think this is actually part of the problem why there's not enough product out there. Is we have very stringent testing standards for marijuana products before they're able to be sold to the consumers. So what we're seeing is a lot of the product that's cultivated in Michigan right now ends up failing those tests, so it can't make it to market. So I have a lot of confidence in the state in terms of the testing parameters they're putting in. Recently, we saw one of the testing laboratories in the state was fined $100,000 for kind of falsifying some of their test results. So obviously the state took a very hard stance on that. So I have a lot of confidence in the state kind of enforcing those testing standards. It just goes back to making sure that we've got enough product to get through the whole chain of custody.
You worked for two former Michigan speakers of the House, Bolger and Cotter. They're not there anymore. But if you're talking with them and you're looking back at the process, are you optimistic about where we are right now, or are you saying, boy, we got a grand mess on our hands?
No, I think absolutely. We've come leaps and bounds from 2011 when I started working on the first legislation in this space. And I mean, dealing with initiatives, both the Medical Marijuana Act and now the Adult Use Act were both citizen initiatives. So you need a 3/4 vote to amend them, which is a difficult thing to do in the legislature when you're talking about a controversial issue. So, we're seeing a lot more kind of bipartisanship on the marijuana front, that people have kind of accepted the fact that this industry is here, it's here to stay, and we need to make sure that we're balancing, creating an industry that's workable and sustainable with an industry that's also protecting the public health.
Attorney Maines, what do you make of the most recent election in which we saw a number of cities opt out of this and say, even though this is the will of the people, we don't want any parts of this, or at least we don't want a part of it right now?
Yeah, and I think that election, really showed how difficult the initiative process can be at the local level, particularly when it comes to marijuana. So we see a lot of people who are putting forth these initiatives to allow facilities within a specific jurisdiction. The problem there is that you can do that, but you can't do any sort of zoning through the initiative process. So even if it passes, Pontiac's a good example of this, where it passed after the recount by 1 vote, the city still gets to decide where they want to put those facilities. So you still have to work within the confines of the city city political process in order to move that forward. But other than that, I don't read too much into the tea leaves of what happened, in November. I think we're going to see a lot of initiatives come up in March. Obviously, we're going to have a very competitive Democratic primary, so I think you start looking at the demographics of who might show up and vote at that primary. They're probably a key target demographic for people who are going to be kind of positive towards marijuana-related things. So I would expect to see a lot more both in March and next November when you see kind of different types of people who are turning out. And I would expect that those are a little bit more successful than when you look at kind of the turnout that we saw in August and November, where a lot of these initiatives failed.
When all of the kinks are worked out, whenever that is, how much money do you think we're potentially talking about for this state and for the state budget? Which right now appears as though they could use some more money to go around.
Well, no comment on that, but certainly, we've seen estimates anywhere from $15 to $20 billion. I mean, this is a major industry potentially for Michigan, and the longer it takes us to work those kinks out, I think we lose some of our competitive advantage. I mean, when we first passed the adult use initiative, we were the first state in the Midwest to do it. Illinois since caught up to us. They're going to start having sales on January 1. So, people who potentially would have come up from Chicago to buy cannabis here are no longer going to be doing
getting
that.
in the game.
Exactly. So, I think we've got a first mover advantage right now in our region and in the area, but that starts to disappear, and I think those numbers trend downwards going forward.
I guess this hasn't been too bad for law firms and lawyers around this state as well, correct?
No, it's been great work, and it's fascinating because obviously every day there's a new court case, new rules, regulations, guidance that's coming out. So, we're at the crossroads of law, politics, and policy, and that's a fascinating area to be in when you're an attorney.
Doug Maines, thanks so much for
Thank you,
coming
Chuck.
in. It's a pleasure having you. Obviously, this is a developing story and situation in this state, so we'll keep watch of it and we'll get you back.
Yeah, I'd appreciate it.
All right. And coming up, we'll talk to Mary King as we go back to our Southfield studio. We'll be talking about the Raise the Age law that's now into effect and exactly how that's going to be implemented. We'll be right back. Don't go away. And welcome back to Spotlight. We're in Southfield now, and we're talking to Mary King. She is the executive director of the Michigan Council on Crime and Delinquency, which is headquartered in Ann Arbor, correct?
That's right.
All right, welcome to Spotlight.
Good morning.
Governor received a lot of attention recently. On October 31st of this year, she signed into law the Raise the Age from 17 to 18.
That's right.
For juveniles, and whether or not they're treated in the adult system or the juvenile system. Before, if you're 17, you automatically went into the adult system.
That's right.
All right. Now it's 18. We were one of only 4 states. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Everybody else in the country
Everybody else figured it out.
figured out that when you're 18, you're an adult. When you're 17, you're still a juvenile.
That's correct.
All right. The only 3 states left that have that distinction now, if you want to call it distinction, would be Georgia, Wisconsin, and Texas.
In Texas.
What in the world took us so long?
Well, that's an interesting question. We've been working on this legislative campaign for about 6 years. And first, we had to kind of build awareness that this was actually a problem. If you were to just ask the normal citizen in Michigan when people became adults and when they went into the adult prison system, they would say 18.
Sure.
So we had to start with actually figuring out what was going on and then educating people about that. We completed a study in 2014, and what we found was that youth who were in the adult systems were doing really badly. And it makes a lot of sense that putting kids into adult jails and adult prisons is not going to be good for them. But what we found out is that those youth were at a higher rate of being physically assaulted, sexually assaulted, trying to commit suicide. And when those youth were coming out of the adult facilities, they were doing far worse than had they been placed in the juvenile facilities.
What turned the tide? Because for a long time, We said 17 was the magic number. What was the turning point?
I think the turning point was that people heard the information, understood that there was harm being caused, and then we had to figure out how we were going to physically transfer youth who were going into the adult system into the youth justice system, because what that meant was a shift in funding.
All right. Was it expensive to have 17-year-olds in the adult system?
So that's an interesting question. There's certainly a cost to put youth in either the adult system or in the youth justice system.
Was one more expensive than the other?
It would depend on what the result was. So for example, if you had a youth that went into adult probation, from a cost perspective, it probably wasn't any more than if they had gone into the juvenile justice system. I think when we talk about cost, we have to talk about long-term costs. So what does it actually cost when you incarcerate a child as an adult and they come back and they're unable to get employment because they have an adult record, and they're unable to access the kind of treatment that they get when they're in the youth justice system? And so if they come out and they're more likely to reoffend, that is also a cost.
So the obvious question is, going from 17 to 18, is that going to make a huge difference in terms of deterring crime in our communities?
I think it absolutely will do that, and I think it will do that for two reasons. One is the youth justice system is much more prepared and equipped to deal with kids. That's their population. That system also is more likely to be able to divert youth, to be able to treat them in community-based settings, to keep them home with their families. These are all things that impact outcomes and help youth to be much more successful.
And looking at the other states that made this transition quite some time ago, has the record been proven to be true that it was smart to move it from 17 to 18?
Absolutely. There was actually a study that was done comparing New York to New Jersey, because New York had not raised the age at that time and New Jersey had. And they looked at kids that had committed the same kind of offenses, went to the adult system in New York, went to the juvenile justice system across the line in New Jersey, and those youth that went into the juvenile justice system did far better upon release. They were committing far less crimes, they were having far better outcomes.
Right. It's now Michigan law.
Yes.
All right. How do we implement this so that it makes a difference?
So the legislation...
And it doesn't actually take effect for a little while yet.
That's right, that's what I was going to say, is that it'll take effect in October of 2021. So you've got 2 years to get the juvenile justice system ready to incorporate the additional 17-year-olds. We project approximately 2,500 or so youth will be coming in as 17-year-olds into the youth justice system. I say that because not all of them will necessarily be served with intensive services. The youth justice system is really good at looking at kids and saying, okay, this youth should actually be diverted. This youth should be put into community-based treatments. And that is what we really are hoping is going to happen when those youth come into the juvenile justice system.
Very good. All right, we're going to take a little break. When we come back, I want to know more about your organization. And I also want to know, for those individuals that are out there saying, but what about those really, really bad teenagers who commit very heinous crimes? Shouldn't they be treated in the adult system? We'll have you answer that when we get right back.
All right, thanks.
Stay with us. What if they commit a really terrible crime? Shouldn't they be treated that way?
So let's talk about that. Because it turns out that all youth are able to be waived, transferred into the adult system depending on their crime and based on decisions that get made at the prosecutorial and judge level.
So the prosecutor and the judge still have that discretion.
They have that
discretion. Say, you're 16-year-old, but what you did was so bad, you need to be treated.
Or 13 or 14, absolutely. Now, where we still have concerns, even though raise the age legislation passed, was that it did not include restrictions that would keep all youth out of adult jails and prisons, no matter what the offense was. What we'd like to see is those youth who get prosecuted still in the adult system because of the nature of their crime, we'd like to see them served in the youth justice system until they turn 18 and then have them complete their sentence in the adult system.
Tell us a little bit about your organization. It was founded back in the 1950s, I think.
That's right.
In Ann Arbor, so you've obviously been at this quite a little bit. What's the mission? What's the goal?
So our organization is the oldest nonprofit organization in the state of Michigan that is dedicated to creating an effective and fair system for youth. That means children, youth, teenagers, and young adults in the justice system.
And how do you do that, Mary, when we hear all too often that those who don't have the financial wherewithal get treated differently in the system? Youth of color oftentimes get treated different in the system. How do you balance that out and level it out so that it's equitable?
So that's a part of what we want to be doing in our organization. We use research, we do advocacy, we build grassroots movements, we do training. And our goal is to make that system more fair, more effective, so that we're reducing inequities in the system, and we're making sure that the youth are successful. All youth are successful that are in the system, not just certain youth.
Are we doing a good job in this state and in this country at taking people who have been incarcerated, they've done their time, and then letting them return to society and making it so that they become productive members of society, if they can be rehabilitated, of course?
So I want to talk about that specifically around kids who have been removed from their families and have been put into a juvenile detention facility or a youth lockup facility, because those are kids we have to be really concerned about. First, what we want to do is we want to minimize that, because what we found and what the research supports is that keeping a child with their family and providing them with services in the community is far better than removing them and then putting them in a lockup facility and then putting them back with their family. Because when you treat them while they're living with their family, you're treating the whole unit. You're not removing, treating, and then putting folks back, or kids back in within their families. These are kids who have been traumatized. They're kids who have come from poor backgrounds. They're kids sometimes who have mental illness. They're kids who have survived assault. These are kids who really have a lot of wounding, a lot of trauma, and what they need is they need treatment. And they need care and understanding. And that really describes the majority of the youth that are in the juvenile justice system.
We're going to leave it on that note. We will get you back because there's a lot to tackle on this. We can't do it all in this period of time, but at least we got to start. We've got a new law, and maybe a year from now, come back and tell us how we're doing with this new law and implementing it before it gets fully implemented.
Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Mary. And we want to thank you at home for joining us. I'm Chuck Stokes. We'll be back next week with more newsmakers in the spotlight. We hope you have a great week.